My name is John, and I love to camp a lot. I find that being in nature and cut off from the outer world brings me more peace and tranquility. I was so thrilled to hear that my pals wanted to go camping in the isolated Crimson Trails. The Crimson Trails were located deep in the forest, far away from any civilization. It was said to be a beautiful and serene place, with clear blue lakes and lush green trees. However, there were also rumors of strange occurrences and unexplained disappearances in the area. But, being the thrill seekers that we were, my friends and I brushed off the rumors and set off on our camping expedition. On a sunny afternoon, we arrived at the Crimson Trails and were astounded by its beauty. The clear blue lakes were sparkling under the sun, and the trees were so tall that they seemed to touch the sky. We set up our campsite near the lake and spent the day swimming, fishing, and enjoying the peacefulness of the place. As the sun began to set, we gathered around the campfire and shared stories. That's when we heard rustling in the bushes nearby. Thinking it was just an animal, we didn't pay much attention to it, but as the night went on, the rustling turned into footsteps and we could hear someone or something breathing heavily. We all sat frozen in fear, not knowing what to do. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the bushes, and we could make out a tall, dark figure with glowing red eyes. We screamed and ran to our tents, locking ourselves in. The figure circled our campsite, its glowing red eyes fixated on us. We could hear it growling and scratching at our tents, trying to get in. Terrified, we huddled together, praying for the morning to come. Thankfully, the figure disappeared as suddenly as it appeared, and we were able to get some sleep. But the next morning, we found strange marks on our tents, as if something had been clawing at them all night. We were all shaken, but we decided to stay and finish our camping trip, thinking that the figure was just a figment of our imagination. However, as the days went on, strange things started happening. Our food supplies would go missing, our belongings would be moved around, and we could hear strange noises in the night. We began to feel like we were being watched at all times. We even found strange symbols carved into the trees around our campsite. One night, screams coming from the lake woke us up. We rushed to see what was happening and found that one of our friends, Rachel, was missing. We searched the entire campsite, but she was nowhere to be found. We then noticed a trail of crimson liquid leading away from the lake. We followed the trail, fearing the worst, and it led us deep into the forest. The trail ended at a small cabin that we had never seen before. Without thinking, we barged into the cabin and found Rachel lying on the floor, unconscious and covered in blood. We quickly carried her back to our campsite and called for help. As we waited for the authorities to arrive, Rachel finally regained consciousness and told us what had happened. She had gone for a late-night swim in the lake when she felt someone watching her. She tried to swim back to shore, but something grabbed her and pulled her underwater. She couldn't see who or what it was, but she could feel its sharp claws digging into her skin. She managed to swim away and make it back to shore, but she had been too scared to tell us until now. The authorities arrived and searched the area, but they found no trace of the creature that had attacked Rachel. They did, however, find a strange journal in the cabin that contained drawings of the same symbols we had found carved into the trees. It also had entries detailing strange rituals and sacrifices that were performed in the area. We packed up our things and left the Crimson Trails immediately, never looking back. It wasn't until we were safely back home that we realized the danger we had put ourselves in. The Crimson Trails were not just a beautiful and serene place, but a place filled with evil and darkness. To this day, I still have nightmares about that camping trip and the creature with the glowing red eyes. I warn anyone who plans to visit the Crimson Trails to stay away, for it is a place where nature and evil coexist. People thought that Blackwood, a small, quiet town, was beautiful and peaceful. It was a popular tourist spot for people who wanted to get away from the busy city life. It was in the middle of a dense forest. According to the legend, the Silent Hunter was a mysterious figure who roamed the forest at night, preying on unsuspecting victims. No one had ever seen him, but his presence was always felt. The townspeople lived in fear of the Silent Hunter, and many believed that he was responsible for the disappearances of several people over the years. But the authorities brushed it off as mere superstition and warned the residents not to venture into the forest at night. One summer, a group of teenagers decided to camp in the forest, defying the warnings of the locals. They were not afraid of the silent hunter, and in fact, they were excited at the thought of encountering him. As the night fell, the forest was shrouded in an eerie silence. The teenagers sat around a campfire, telling ghost stories and laughing, unaware of the danger that lurked in the darkness. Suddenly, they heard a blood-curdling scream coming from the woods. It sounded like a woman's cry for help. The teenagers looked at each other, their hearts racing with fear.
"Did you hear that?"
One of them whispered.
"It has to be the hunter who is silent."
Another replied, trying to sound brave. They all sat frozen in fear, not knowing what to do. The scream echoed through the forest again, closer this time. The teenagers could sense a presence lurking nearby. Just then, a figure emerged from the shadows. It was a tall, shadowy figure dressed in a long cloak. Its face was hidden behind a mask, and it carried a large scythe in its hand. The teenagers were paralyzed with fear as the silent hunter approached them. They could see the glint of hunger in its eyes as it raised its scythe and pointed it towards them. The teenagers vanished one by one into thin air, their screams drowned out by the forest's deafening silence. The next morning, when the authorities arrived at the scene, there was no sign of the campfire or the teenagers. They searched the entire forest, but there was no trace of them. People in the town were sure that the silent hunter had killed more people. However, they had no idea that the worst was yet to come. As the years went by, more and more people went missing in Blackwood. The authorities were baffled, and the townspeople started to believe that the legend of the silent hunter was true. But no one could have imagined the truth behind the legend. The silent hunter was not just a figment of their imagination, but a real person with a twisted mind. The silent hunter was actually a man named Edward who had been living in the forest for years. His family had left him alone in the wilderness to fend for himself. Driven mad by loneliness and hunger, Edward created the legend of the silent hunter to justify his actions. He would sneak into the town at night, disguised as the silent hunter, and hunt down his victims. But he didn't just kill them. He harvested their organs and sold them on the black market, making a fortune for himself. The townspeople were horrified when the truth was revealed, but it was too late. The silent hunter had already claimed many victims, and their bodies were never found. Edward was arrested and sent to a mental institution, but the residents of Blackwood could never shake off the fear of the silent hunter. The legend lived on, and the forest remained a place of terror for those who dared to enter it. The ghost of the silent hunter's harvest still haunts the town of Blackwood, serving as a reminder that sometimes the most terrifying monsters are those that live among us. The sun had already disappeared behind the horizon, leaving the sky painted with shades of orange, purple, and blue. The forest was silent, except for the occasional rustle of leaves and the distant howling of wolves. It was getting darker by the minute, and the air was getting colder. The perfect setting for a horror story. A group of 5 friends, Max, Sarah, Jake, Lisa, and Emily, had decided to go on a weekend camping trip in the wilderness. They were all excited about the trip, but little did they know the horrors that awaited them in the darkness of the night. As they set up their tents and made a fire, Max told them about the legend of the forest. The legend said that every night, when the sun sets, the forest comes alive with creatures and spirits that are only visible in the dark. The friends laughed it off, thinking it was just a silly story to scare children. But as the night fell, they started to feel uneasy. The once lively forest was now quiet and eerie. The fire was the only source of light and warmth, and they huddled around it, trying to ignore the unsettling feeling in their stomach. Suddenly, they heard a loud growling sound coming from the bushes. They all jumped up, their hearts racing with fear. Max tried to brush it off as just an animal, but the growling continued, getting louder and closer. Jake grabbed a flashlight and shone it towards the bushes. They were all frozen in fear when they saw a pair of glowing yellow eyes staring back at them. It was no animal. It was something else, something sinister. The beast came at them, its long, pointed claws scratching at the canvas before they could respond. The buddies abandoned all they owned as they yelled and fled for their lives. They didn't stop running until they reached a clearing where they could see the moon and the stars shining in the sky. They were out of breath and terrified, but they felt safe now that they were away from that creature. As they caught their breath, they realized that Emily was missing. They frantically called out her name, but there was no answer. They knew they had to go back and find her, but they were too scared to face that creature again. After what seemed like hours, they heard Emily's voice calling out to them. They followed her voice and found her standing in front of a small abandoned cabin. Her face was pale, and her eyes were wide with fear. She explained to them that while looking for a place to hide from a pack of wolves, she had stumbled upon the cabin. She was afraid that the wolves were still following her, so they all decided to take shelter in the cabin for the night. The cabin was old and run down, with cobwebs hanging from the ceiling and a musty smell that made it hard to breathe. But it was better than being outside, alone in the dark. As they settled in, they heard strange noises coming from outside. It sounded like someone or something was scratching at the walls and windows. They were too scared to go out and check, so they huddled together and waited for morning to come. But morning never came. The sky remained dark, and the noises continued. They realized that they were trapped in the cabin with no way out. Panic set in as they tried to come up with a plan to escape. Suddenly, the door burst open, and the creature from the night before stood before them, its eyes glowing with a menacing red light. It let out a blood-curdling scream, and the friends knew that they were doomed. They tried to fight back. The creature was too strong. It attacked them one by one, tearing them apart with its sharp claws. Jake and Lisa were the next to leave, followed by Sarah and Max. Emily was the only one left, and she knew she couldn't defeat the creature on Earth. But then she remembered the legend that Max had told them. She remembered that the creatures only came out at night and disappeared when the sun rose. With a glimmer of hope, she ran towards the window and opened the curtains, letting the moonlight flood into the cabin. Instantly, the creature let out a deafening scream and disappeared into thin air. The sky started to lighten and the birds started chirping. Although Emily had survived the night, she was all by herself and surrounded by the bodies of her friends. As she walked out of the cabin, she realized that the legend was true, and they had all fallen victim to the creatures of the night. She made a promise to herself never to go into the wilderness again, especially at nightfall.